Fed rate hikes' effect on inflation may take longer, says Vice Chair. Biden re-evaluating U.S. relationship with Saudis after OPEC decision. Malala Yousufzai visits Pakistan on 10th anniversary of Taliban shooting. Israeli forces raid Shuafat refugee camp near occupied East Jerusalem. 1 in 3 of world's poorest countries spend more on debt repayments than education. Kuwait to develop world's most walkable carbon-free green city. From Chicago studios, this is the Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. Assalamu alaikum, I'm Samana Siddiqui. Our top story tonight. The U.S. Federal Reserve's vice chair said on Monday that the effect of interest rate hikes on high inflation may take longer than anticipated. Lael Brainerd said the moderation on the demand side due to the Fed's aggressive monetary tightening is only partly realized so far. She was speaking at the 64th National Association for Business Economics annual meeting in Chicago. She added it will be a while for the cumulative tightening to transmit throughout the economy and to bring inflation down. Brainerd said the Fed's tighter monetary policy is mostly being seen in highly interest rate sensitive sectors such as housing. Housing price appreciation has fallen sharply in recent months. Charles Evans, head of the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago, said the Fed could bring inflation down relatively quickly while also avoiding a recession. U.S. President Joe Biden is re-evaluating the U.S.'s relationship with Saudi Arabia, the White House said Monday. The move comes after Riyadh supported a global oil production cut that sent prices soaring. Last week, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, or OPEC, and its allies cut daily production by 2 million barrels starting in November. Oil prices quickly jumped by about 10% before moderating slightly this week. National Security Council spokesman John Kirby said in light of the OPEC decision, the U.S. needs to be willing to revisit its relationship with the Saudis. The Biden administration accused OPEC and its allies of aligning with Russia as the Kremlin continues to press its war on Ukraine. The West and its global allies have sought to clamp down on Russia's funding sources, such as oil revenues. On October 15th, Swetweden Muhammad, an Imam in Philadelphia for nearly 38 years, will be presented with a Lifetime Achievement Award during the M-Gage, Pennsylvania Gala. The recognition is in honor of the work he's done to uplift others and the initiatives he's spearheaded through the Muslim League of Voters. Muhammad is one of the founders of Masjid Muhammad, located in the Germantown section of Philadelphia. The mosque was founded about 25 years ago. While traveling across the country every weekend for 13 years, Muhammad said he found every city had a Masjid Muhammad but Philadelphia. Muhammad's brother Sunni Ali, who died earlier this year, was also a founding member of the mosque. Amazon can now deliver packages more efficiently in the East Metro area with its new and more accommodating facility in Woodbury, Minnesota. The 550,000 square foot facility is a first for Amazon in Minnesota. Its design includes several multi-faith rooms, prayer rooms, accompanied by hand and feet washing stations. About 300 people work at the new warehouse, and most are part of Minnesota's large Somali community. The new accommodations come after several demonstrations and protests at Amazon's fulfillment center in the city of Shakopee. Employees there demanded higher pay, safer work environments, and time off for the Islamic holiday of Eid. Minnesota's Council on American-Islamic Relations has supported the employees' demands over the years. Jailani Hussain, Executive Director for CAIR Minnesota, said Amazon hired a lot of Muslim Minnesotans but didn't understand how to accommodate its diverse workforce. The company recently increased pay nationwide for its frontline workers to about $19 an hour. It has started a Welcome Door program to help refugee and immigrant employees gain citizenship, among other things. The Maryland office of the Council on American-Islamic Relations strongly condemned a violent assault and forced removal of 2 Afghan students' hijabs. The attack occurred last month at Baltimore's City Academy for College and Career Exploration. CAIR welcomed the school system's initial response to calls for an investigation into the incidents, restorative and disciplinary action, and systemic policy changes. CAIR Maryland's director, Zainab Chaudhry, called for a hate bias probe of the incidents. CAIR demanded corrective action against staff who locked the bathroom door while a Muslim student was being assaulted inside and failed to immediately notify parents. The group also sought restorative measures against students who attacked the Muslim girls. It demanded the school provide compassionate, culturally appropriate counseling and support services for the targeted students. The group also urged systemic policy changes and trainings, including anti-bullying and cultural competency training for students and staff. Nobel Peace Laureate Malala Yousafzai returned to her native Pakistan on Tuesday to meet flood victims, 10 years after the Taliban attempted to assassinate her. It's Yousafzai's second visit since she was flown to Britain for life-saving treatment after she was attacked. Her visit comes as thousands of people protest in her hometown, where the Taliban is once again on the rise. Yousafzai was 15 years old when the Pakistani Taliban, an independent group with the same ideology as the Afghan Taliban, shot her in the head over her advocacy for girls' education. She landed in Karachi on Tuesday, 2 days after the 10th anniversary of her attack. Yousafzai will travel to areas devastated by unprecedented monsoon flooding. Her visit aims to help keep international attention focused on the impact of floods in Pakistan and reinforce the need for critical humanitarian aid, the Malala Fund said. A third of Pakistan is underwater after catastrophic floods since June, which displaced 8 million people and caused an estimated $28 billion in damages. Experts in England and Wales have concluded granting legal rights to non-human entities, such as animals, trees, and rivers, would help tackle climate change and the loss of biodiversity. That's according to a report published Monday by the Law Society, the professional body for solicitors in England and Wales. The report suggested introducing legal protections that would create a link between damage to the environment and the person or body who caused it. It concluded the evolution of this relationship demands new regulations, including rights for non-humans. Israeli forces raid Shuafat refugee camp. Details after the break, so stay tuned, and we'll be right back after these messages.
A free 3-minute online chat can give you the personalized tips you need to start boosting your retirement savings today.
I am what hunger looks like in America.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes.
There are 16 million children struggling with hunger in America. That's 1 in 5 daughters, sons, neighbors, and classmates who don't know where their next meal is coming from. Yet billions of pounds of good food go to waste every year. It's time we do something about it. Feeding America is a nationwide network of food banks that helps provide meals to millions of kids and families in need. Visit feedingamerica.org to help them feed even more. Together, we can solve hunger. Together, we're feeding America.
To stop this genocide, we need your help.
On Tuesday, Israeli forces raided the Shuafat refugee camp near occupied East Jerusalem. The camp is home to tens of thousands of Palestinians. It has been under siege by Israeli forces as they hunt for an alleged Palestinian shooter accused of carrying out an attack against Israeli soldiers. For the past 3 days, entries and exits to some neighborhoods have been closed and some roads blocked by Israeli security forces. The Yedioth Ahronot newspaper identified the Palestinian as Odey Tamimi from Shuafat. His parents were arrested by Israeli forces, while his brother and the driver who took him to the site of the attack turned themselves in, the Daily said. 3 others believed to be involved were also arrested, according to the newspaper. An Israeli soldier was killed and 2 others were injured late Saturday when a gunman opened fire on a group of Israeli soldiers. No one claimed responsibility for the attack. Fort Royal Primary School in the city of Worcester, UK, has stopped providing a halal option for students. This is after the meat provider failed to provide absolute assurances its meat was halal. Head teacher Ed Francis issued a letter to parents and staff saying for the last 2 years, all meat served in the school has been halal. This is aside from a few cases when supply has not been possible. However, he said after the supplier did not confirm on paper that the meat for the school was halal, officials decided not to offer this option in school. He said before sending the letter to staff and parents, he spoke with the president of the Worcester Muslim Welfare Association and explained the situation. Bahraini courts have run sham trials that have led to the convictions and death sentences of 8 men. That's according to a joint report by Human Rights Watch and the Bahrain Institute for Rights and Democracy. In the report released Monday, the rights groups claim the men were convicted based on confessions obtained through torture and coercion. Michael Page is Deputy Middle East Director at HRW. He said the many human rights violations that underlie these death sentences reflect not a justice system, but a pattern of injustice. The rights group said some defendants were denied access to evidence used at trial. In one case, a defendant was not allowed to cross-examine secret sources. None of the defendants was allowed counsel during interrogations, the rights groups alleged. Joshua Kongalo Bryan, the report's primary author, called for officials to commute all death sentences immediately and reinstate the de facto moratorium on executions. Last year, rights groups claimed death sentences in Bahrain had increased dramatically since the 2011 Arab Spring uprising. Page said Bahraini officials claim the government respects fundamental human rights, but courts have relied on coerced confessions despite defendants' credible claims of torture and ill treatment. Kuwait has unveiled plans to develop a completely carbon-free green city to be named X0, LCSA reports. It is planned to be the largest of its kind in the world and the first in the Middle East. Construction of the eco-city is said to be in line with the strategy set out by Kuwait's Vision 2035. It will be considered the world's most walkable city, the Daily Mail reports. X0 will be designed in the shape of a flower and consist of hubs dedicated to various public facilities, such as education, healthcare, and entertainment. The project aims to provide a net zero carbon lifestyle for roughly 100,000 residents and will be built by UAE-based sustainable developer URB. More than 65% of the project's land area will be set aside for open spaces. The estimated cost of the project will be $15 billion, the firm told the Mail Online. Construction is scheduled to begin in 2024 and completed over 10 years. A report by Save the Children reveals 1 in 3 of the world's poorest nations spends more on paying off debt to wealthy countries and investors than educating its children. The UK-based charity's report, Fixing a Broken System, Transforming Education Financing, was published this week. It shows 21 out of 70 low and lower income middle countries spent more on external debt repayment than on education in 2020. The report says interest payments will account for an average of 10% of the annual budget in this category of countries by 2024, up from 7% in 2015. The report also said nearly 1 in 3 children in low-income countries do not finish primary school. Coming up next after the break is our in-depth analysis segment, so stay tuned and we'll be right back after these messages.
Greetings of peace. Assalamu alaikum. My name is Dawood Warnsby. About 30 years ago, I walked into a mosque for the first time here in Canada, and I felt pretty strange. The reason I felt so weird? Well, in those days, it wasn't easy to walk into a mosque and find someone else who was a shaggy-haired singer-songwriter who wrote poetry and worked professionally as a puppeteer. I had no idea how I was going to fit in culturally or creatively with this new community. I quickly realized that there was a long and rich history of arts in the Muslim community that went hand in hand with education and learning. A little while later, I came upon a magazine from an organization called Sound Vision. And they had a little blurb at the back of the magazine that said, "If you're creative, we'd love to work with you." I took some songs that I'd been writing, put them on a little cassette and called them A Whisper of Peace, sent them through to Sound Vision. I had no idea that over 25 years later, I would still be working with Sound Vision. Things have really changed over the last quarter century. Now we see tons of creative, commercial Muslim artists making music and videos and film and television and comedy and cartoons. It's wonderful. But sadly, we're also still seeing a lack of educational materials for young children. Sound Vision continues to be one of the only non-profit media producers creating quality educational content for Muslim children and families. Children need mentors and teachers who are able and willing to help inspire them with wisdom, self-esteem, and care for their world. The Adam's World series has been rebooted as an app with new episodes and new songs. We have the popular Adam's World Club and the Colors of Islam classes for children and youth to attend online. And now there's a new program in the works called Falafel Dude, helping school children learn to be better citizens, better neighbors, and better Muslims. Join me in supporting Sound Vision's ongoing work however you can, so that we can continue to inspire Muslim children and families for generations to come. Assalamu alaikum.
To stop this genocide, we need your help.
Welcome back. It's time for our in-depth analysis segment. Let's watch.
And now we dive into today's discussion with a special guest, Dr. Fadel Kaboub. We're going to be discussing, inshallah, the issue of inflation and in rising inequality in the United States. What's the cause of it? What can be done about it? What shouldn't be done about it? We're very happy to discuss those issues with Dr. Kaboub. Let's bring him on. You all know him. He's been a guest on the program numerous times. He's a professor of economics at Denison, and he serves as president of the Global Institute for Sustainable Prosperity. Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Kaboub. How are you?
Alaikum salam. Thank you for having me back on the show. I'm doing great.
No, thank you for coming back, mashallah. So let's dive in. There's a new CBO report that gave us some indication of the difficulties the American people continue to face economically and in terms of inequality. Can you tell us about the CBO report and what it showed?
Well, in a way, it is shocking, but not surprising, because we've seen this trend build up for the last couple of decades. And what the CBO is showing in this report is that while wealth has tripled in the last decades on average for American families, the distribution of that wealth has been massively unequal, in the sense that the bottom 50% of the population in the US is only accumulating 2% of the national wealth, where we also have the top 1% of the wealth distribution essentially controlling a third of the wealth of the nation. That is a level of inequality that we haven't seen in the US before. And that basically tells us that we fundamentally, from a structural perspective, we have an economic engine that automatically distributes more wealth to the top. And what we should be doing is, instead of keeping the same engine that produces inequality, produces socioeconomic exclusion, and then wondering how we're going to redistribute this unequal situation back into something more reasonable, because redistribution is very difficult, if you haven't noticed, politically. Instead of doing this, what we need to be doing is completely changing the engine altogether and replacing it with an engine that does the right kind of pre-distribution instead of fighting in a system of redistribution. And that's really the biggest economic challenge and political challenge that we face in this country. And that's a problem of governance, a problem of democracy, fundamentally.
So, Dr. Kaboub, then what does the solution look like? Because obviously this has been, the debate of the 20th century was, what is the proper economic model for a country, a government to follow? And there were literally wars fought about this for decades. There'd be socialists, communists, capitalists, somewhere in between. What to your mind then is the ideal engine that would lead to more equality, and obviously not complete economic equality, that's possible in the world, but less inequality? What does that engine look like?
Well, we have the blueprint for the economic model, and it starts from the Constitution, a government of the people, by the people, for the people. So, and when it comes to regulating the economic system, because economic policy is made up of a legal framework that's created by the 535 lawmakers that we elect in Washington, D.C. And setting up that legal framework allows us to design the right way of pre-distributing wealth. In the current system, we have a political system that's heavily influenced by big pharma, by Wall Street, by the multinational corporations that suck wealth from the nation, from the working class, and from the rest of the world, to be honest. So we have to have the political courage to redesign public policy in a way that's more fair and equitable and inclusive. And that's really fundamentally a question of democracy. It's not a question of socialism versus capitalism versus any kind of other ism. It's a question of using the foundation that we have in the Constitution and designing a legal framework that allows people to thrive as workers, as citizens, as opposed to setting up a system that allows for the formation of monopolies and cartels and oligopolies. Our antitrust laws, for example, are outdated. They're more than 100 years old, And they were not written and designed for a world of big pharma, of super PACs, a world of Silicon Valley, big tech companies. And we haven't had the political courage to rethink the way we write the laws of the land when it comes to corporate power in this country.
Interesting. So it sounds like what I'm hearing from you, Dr. Hu, is that we've got so much political power concentrated in the hands of major giant corporations that eat up other corporations whenever they have a good idea. And so strengthening antitrust laws, you think, might be one way to increase competition and separate and divide up that power. And so you don't have corporations, giant corporations, wielding so much power and influence over our political system and over tax breaks and other such things. So let me ask you this. So we've got the inflation situation that's going on. Since I last spoke to you, are things actually getting better, leveling off? What's the situation with inflation? Because my understanding is that also is something that harms quote unquote working class people more immediately and more directly than necessarily people who have more wealth stored up.
Well, the inflation situation is obviously hasn't been resolved in the US or globally. And it's specifically because the inflation pressure points that we're dealing with have persisted. Their root causes have persisted, and we're not tackling the root causes. For example, when it comes to the actual inflation pressure points in the US, we had inflation pressure points that have existed for the last 2 or 3 decades, pre-COVID, pre the conflict in the Ukraine. And then we added on top of it the supply chain disruptions related to the global COVID pandemic that added to shipping delays and manufacturing delays and shortages of components and things like that, and the big traffic jam in the oceans for shipping components. That adds inflation. And then, of course, with the conflict in the Ukraine, we have 2 additional major pressure points related to food and energy prices globally, and also prices of raw materials from Russia, minerals and things like that are very critical for manufacturing globally. And that just increases commodity prices across the board. So all of these inflation pressure points still persist, and there's no reason to believe that they're going to go away, magically when the Federal Reserve Bank decides to raise interest rates. So raising interest rates here by the Federal Reserve Bank will not find a diplomatic solution to the conflict in the Ukraine. So it's not going to tame that inflation pressure point. It's not going to undo the logistical delays and the supply chain disruptions that we have for the last 2 years related to COVID. Raising interest rate doesn't solve that. It's way outside the jurisdiction of the Fed. And then the earlier pre-existing inflation pressure points that we had in the US before 2020 are from 4 major areas. 1 is healthcare, 2 is higher education, 3 is energy and transportation, and 4 is real estate and housing. And again, the Fed raising interest rates is not going to give us a different healthcare system or tame the abusive market power of big pharma, of health insurance companies, or solve the student debt crisis. A lot of these inflation pressure points are long-term, structural, and they're actually in the jurisdiction of Congress rather than the Federal Reserve Bank. But instead, when the Fed raises interest rate, because they think that's the only policy tool that is available to the country, when they raise interest rate, they increase the cost of doing business. In other words, they slow down the economy. They actually cause unemployment. And the Fed has been pretty honest the last few weeks, saying that they're willing to cause a recession if they have to. Because when they cause a recession, unemployed people can't buy additional goods and services. So that reduces the demand and allows the supply to catch up a little bit. And that literally translates into throwing some people under the bus, the most vulnerable people under the bus, in order to fight inflation with interest rates, instead of doing the right thing, which is addressing the underlying causes of inflation.
Well, you answered my next question, which is going to be, could the Fed end up causing harm through what they're doing? I think you've answered that question. Of course, we as Muslims know, there's all this jurisprudence about why interest rates on debt are bad and riba and all that stuff. And so you can kind of see this manifested in real life through this financial experiment that keeps happening over and over again. So it sounds like what you're saying is, look, the inflation problem, a lot of that is just a result of current events, right, that are not going to be fixed overnight, number one. In the meantime, what the Fed is doing could create more problems than it solves. And in the meantime, Congress is not getting anything done. So this is all, it seems like this is all bad news all around, So what can be done in the short term, do you think? I mean, even if it's on an individual family level, what is there anything positive that anyone can do to try to address these issues in the short term while Russia's at war with Ukraine, the Fed is doing what it's doing, Congress is not doing anything? Is there anything anyone can do, or should we just be raising our voices, saying you've got to make structural change to address these problems?
Well, believe it or not, in the midst of all of this mess and all of this negative kind of context that I provided, there is actually a glimmer of hope, even from Congress, from President Biden, because when you think of what the Inflation Reduction Act was about, when you think of the partial student debt cancellation was about, these are actually anti-inflation policies. Notice that the Inflation Reduction Act, for example, part of it was going after the abusive market power of corporations, including pharmaceuticals. So the government will be negotiating at least the prices of 20-some major drugs to lower the cost. That is part of going after the abusive market power of Big Pharma. The Inflation Reduction Act, believe it or not, includes strategic spending on renewable energy infrastructure to encourage the production and use of electric vehicles here in the US. That is good news because it increases job creation and it allows us to wean the economy off of fossil fuels and off of one of the sources of inflation, which is fossil fuel prices, global energy prices. But we're doing it a little too late and on a much, much smaller scale. So one of the things we can do as a country, as informed citizens, is call for more of the above, more student debt cancellation, more taxing and regulation of abusive market power, democratizing the economy, and more strategic investments that will tame these sources of abusive market power and sources of inflation related to fossil fuels, healthcare costs, and so on. We've done a little bit of it under the Inflation Reduction Act and the student debt partial debt cancellation, but we should be doing way more on a more sustained basis. As individual consumers, we need to be, and as members of a democratic society, especially the media, we need to be calling out corporations who are actually taking advantage of the COVID crisis, taking advantage of the inflation crisis, taking advantage of the conflict in the Ukraine, and blaming everything on these global events in order to raise their prices, not just to cover the cost of doing business, but they're doing above and beyond covering the cost of doing business. They're actually widening their profit margins and reporting record prices, and they're actually speaking about it publicly. When you listen to the shareholder conference calls that the CEOs and CFOs are actually announcing this publicly. They're saying the pricing environment is favorable, we're able to raise prices, and nobody's complaining, not the government, not the public, so we're going to go ahead and widen our profit margins. These are the kinds of things that we need to engage with directly, and that affects us immediately in terms of our budget, in terms of grocery costs and cost of health and transportation. All of these things affect us.
Gotcha. Well, thank you so much, Professor. We appreciate that perspective and insight, and we look forward to having you back in the future, God willing, to hopefully discuss some more positive economic news, inshallah. Thank you so much for joining us.
I appreciate it.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you. That's all from our Chicago studios tonight. Thank you for tuning in. You can find previous episodes and more on our YouTube or Facebook. For more content, keep watching Muslim Network TV or visit muslimnetwork.tv. Salam and good night.